To get started, the topics we're going to cover are the difference between price and cost. Cost is what you value the product at in inventory, which typically reflects the purchase price plus a certain degree of applied overhead or burden or indirect cost along those lines. Price refers to either what you sell it for to customers when you invoice for a sale or what you purchase it for from a vendor on a purchase order. The functionality in Dynamics works the same for both sales price and purchase price. So whatever I'm showing you here for the purchase price is workable and configurable on a sales order accordingly. So we're going to focus on a purchased part price, and we're going to start with a very simple scenario where we will set up a single price that we will expect to pay as a default on a purchase order every single time we buy the product from every vendor we might buy the product from. For most customers, though, that's not quite the typical scenario. You might have multiple vendors you buy from, and the price may change over time. Next, we'll move on to discussing how to set up and configure multiple vendors for a product, each of which can have their own price, and show that the purchase order will default correctly based upon the vendor we are buying the product from. And then finally, we'll go through a more advanced scenario where within a single vendor and part relationship, we might have more than one price that vendor might charge us, depending on the date. For instance, we could have 2023 versus 2024 pricing, or the quantity. We might have a price break or a lower price if we purchase a significant volume on the product. So we're going to discuss all three of those complex scenarios. And then as a bonus material, we're going to show how we can upload this magically into Dynamics using Excel. You might be familiar with the Open in Excel feature on most menu screens in Dynamics, but we're going to use the Excel Publish feature, which will allow us to take a file such as a vendor's price list that they might provide us through email or we download from their website, publish it using Excel, and that'll avoid having to rekey it in Dynamics or give it to IT and have them use the import-export process in data management or anything like that. So with that background in play, let's go ahead and get started with a demonstration of how this works. I'm going to begin with a released product. In this case, my test product is a widget, and I'm going to go to the Purchase Expander Fast tab of the released product record, and you'll see I've got a default price right now of $0. This is a brand new product. I have no idea what I'm going to pay for it, and I need to establish a default. So I've got two options I can pursue right now. The first is I'm going to leave it at 0, send a purchase order to the vendor with no price on it, rely on the vendor to give me feedback on what the current price is. So I'm going to use the purchase order as what I'll call the poor man's request for quotation. The vendor is going to respond. I'm going to update the purchase order. Now, with this field that I'm about to turn on called latest purchase price enabled, that will enable a feature in Dynamics where updating the purchase order for a product will automatically roll and update the default price for the next purchase order for that product. So I can simply turn on that button, leave the 0 alone, and allow the first purchase order to automatically create the default price going forward. But in this case, I'm going to take a more convenient approach. I'm just going to put in a default starting price for our demonstration here and reflect that I expect to pay $10 for this part as a default for every purchase order for every vendor. Now, the second scenario we discussed was vendor-specific pricing. I might have more than one vendor that provides this part, and they each have the opportunity to quote me a different price, different lead times, etc. Dynamics supports that through what is called a trade agreement. So I will now create a trade agreement line for this product. I've got the trade agreement journal header created here on my screen. I'm going to go ahead and create a new line now. I'm going to set it up for a specific vendor. And in this example, I'll do vendor US 101 using the Contosa data. I will enter my widget part number and the unit price that I expect to pay. Now recall, my product has a default of $10 on it. So to verify that the trade agreement works here with this vendor, I'm going to show that this particular vendor charges me $9 per unit for that part. I'm also going to establish that I've got a second vendor, so I'm going to go ahead and copy the line, just going to duplicate all that record there. And I'm going to put a different vendor on here. In this case, I'll do vendor 103, the same widget, and vendor 103 charges me $9.50. So you'll have two different prices in effect here in addition to the default price for the product if I don't buy from one of these two vendors. Now, while I'm in here, this is the same screen where we address the quantity breaks or the date effective times as well. So you'll notice this has a column called from quantity and a column called from date. And those are currently populated with 0 and the beginning of time, which means they are effective immediately and any quantity and will be effective for any date into the future and up to any quantity. But I'm going to take vendor 101 and establish a price break. So I'm going to copy that line down here. And I'm going to say that for a quantity of 100 or greater, I am, instead of paying $9, going to get a reduced price of $7.50. And I'm going to put one more line in here just to show how it can work. And I've got quantity of 0, but I'm going to show a price effective next year. So we'll put January 1st, 24 out there as the beginning date. And I'm going to reflect a price increase that takes effect next year. It'll take the price up to $9.25. And now I will go ahead and post those journals. Posting is what makes them go into effect. Prior to doing that, they're simply in there as a draft. And if I go back to my release product record now, I can look at view trade agreements to show the pricing that is applicable for that. And you can see the different vendor relationships there. And scrolling over to the right, the different effective dates, different quantities, different prices, etc. there. So that kicks in and makes them effective. Now, to show how they work on creating purchase orders, I'll just bring up a sample purchase order here. And we'll start by buying the product from a vendor that we do not have a price agreement with. And we'll use vendor 105 for that. Now you'll recall that with no trade agreement, we should be seeing the parts regular default. So I'll put in the widget, and you'll see that the unit price has correctly defaulted to $10. Let's go back and create another purchase order, but we'll use one of the trade agreement vendors this time to verify that vendor-specific pricing takes effect. By default, I'm going to be reflecting 2023 delivery date here, so we should see this year's pricing go into effect. The unit price has correctly reflected $9, my negotiated price for this year for this vendor. Now, if I change the quantity, I think we had a 100-piece price break, so let's put 120 on my unit price. You'll see that the price is automatically reduced to $7.50. So that's showing that the pricing is automated and defaulting based upon the relationships I've set up. Now, the last thing I had mentioned was receiving a price list from a vendor. So I've got an Excel spreadsheet that has a sample of, say, part numbers and unit prices. I'm not going to get into price breaks or date effective or anything like that. I've got a second spreadsheet up here that is with the Excel add-in connecting to Dynamics 365 trade agreement lines. So I'm simply going to take the first spreadsheet, copy my part numbers, and put them into the part number field. I'm going to copy down the trade agreement line and the vendor information. And I'm going to copy my unit prices. And I will just hit publish. That will real-time import it into Dynamics. See that I got a publish successful message in the bottom. So now we'll go into Dynamics, go to our trade agreement journals. That was journal 637 from my spreadsheet. And if I look at the lines, you'll see that they're all in there with those part numbers, quantities, dates, vendor relationship, all of that good to go. I can double check it, review it for accuracy. And then from here, I can simply post it to make it effective.